The two aspects I want to talk about are quality of service, as we've been mentioning, and also really to give you a feel for some of the guidance on API that we are going to be providing to different members, depending on what they're actually developing in terms of APIs. So the aims of the presentation, discuss and seek guidance on agreeing quality of service for RODEO outputs, and on the APIs to update directors on kind of development timeline within RODEO, and to inform what advice will be given to those developing their own APIs, and to those relying on the APIs that we are developing within RODEO. So, quality of service. This is quality of service guidance that we've had from various parts of the European Union. So, first of all, on the left-hand side of the slide, from the HVD regulation itself, it says that we should set out and publish the terms of use of the API and the quality of service criteria on its performance, capacity, and availability. And this has to be published. Previous project manager Mina Huskinen had conversations with DG Connect on this, Jiri Pilar, who works for DG Connect and is the principal case officer responsible for the publication of the HVD regulation, who myself and Christoph Jakob have met with many times over the last 5 years. And the kind of guidance they gave us is the sorts of things that we should be monitoring and measuring as far as APIs are concerned. I won't go through the list here, but that is the idea from the EU really on the sorts of things that should be being measured. Feedback we got from the ESO team when we discussed this was that a lot of these things can be measured easily and automatically. The issue that then comes up is you then need somebody to look at the figures and then see if something needs to be done. So we've had a couple of meetings within the project and lots of discussions about how to tackle service level, what types of service levels that we might want to put in. Now, at the moment, I am just talking about the service level of providing the HVDs to make sure members are compliant. But I will touch on the kind of differences and similarities and the fact that we might actually be doing other stuff as well with a lot of the things that we've developed. But in terms of the HVDs, we came up with really 3 different types of service level. One is best effort, kind of business hours. So it would be supported on a best effort basis. So effectively, if something fell over on a Friday afternoon, then it wouldn't be looked at until the Monday. Another level you might have is some sort of time critical, where you try and do some fixes in an hour. The idea being you've got your first, second, and third level support, and you can address things quite quickly. Or obviously the kind of gold standard service level, if you like, where you've got 24-hour support and you try and fix things immediately. So we had a discussion about, and we had quite a good discussion about this very recently as well. And the point was made, and I think you in the preparation for this workshop made the same point, Roar. We're developing the APIs and also the FEMD gateway, and they are going to be resilient anyway. And often we develop these systems, and they're quite happy to work away, as long as you don't do anything to them. The feedback we got from some of the other work packages was you tend to have problems with these things, these systems, when you try and do something. Like maybe you do an update, maybe you do something, and you don't do it quite right. So we'll have resilient service. So the expected level of, if you like, expected level of service, which is how we think it would actually operate, will be quite high. You know, we're not expecting we're developing something that's going to fall over regularly. We also recognize that some of the infrastructure that will be providing the HVDs will have a higher level of service. This is because they may be used for other time critical services. You think of the FMD gateway, if we're moving data between each other, Jeremy alluded to it, there would be a higher level service to that. We may have some time critical services that needs to use the data that we're moving between each other, so there will be higher levels of service there. So by default, some of the HVDs will have a higher level of service than others. But in terms of a kind of a baseline for the high value data sets, then we were kind of proposing that best efforts would be the kind of level of service for ensuring that members are compliant with the HVD regulation. I have to say that when we sought guidance from the external advisory board, which has a mix of members on it, and of course somewhere from the private sector, they obviously suggested the gold standard. Really some questions to seek guidance. This is not about making a decision now. This is about getting views of the directors. So the question, can we agree a service level for HVDs that all of the members can sign up to, all the EU-based members? Or would we be looking to agree, say, a service level for the FMD gateway, because that's something we're all using, and then individual members would have to determine the service levels for their own APN endpoints and HVD provision? And also, are there any other further questions on service levels? So I think, Roar, at that point, I'll pause and let you see if there's quite. I can see that Charlie has put something in the chat, but I'm not able to read it because I'm sharing my screen. But I'm happy to answer any questions at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Willie. And yes, we would very much like to hear your views. Charlie has written in the chat, but he has also raised his hand, so you can say it orally, Charlie.
Yeah, I mean, at least in the US and the UK, and it might not apply more widely, but the term best efforts is actually quite a high service level, and it means that you're committing to do everything you possibly can to break fix, whereas reasonable endeavours is the term that's typically used for something that you'll do your best with. So it's only words, but and that might need a bit of look at for its international context. But I think what Willie was describing was what I would interpret in service management speak to be reasonable endeavours.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think we did throw the words around. I didn't come up with the term best efforts. I can't remember why it was got to, but yes, you're in that respect. You're talking about reasonable endeavours. I think it was a mix of using a term that we thought was more plain as opposed to a legal term, but probably we've used the wrong term.
Good. Any other views on this? Tarja.
Yes, hello. I was just wondering if there is some estimates for FEMD from the architectural point of view, that what would be the uptime of it, or is it just dependent on the usage amount, or how we could maybe better navigate that? What are the possible options for the service level?
So
That's
Jeremy, perhaps you can answer that.
I was going to say that's a very good question. I have no intention to try and attempt to answer that one, Ro.
No, but Jeremy has raised his hand, so I guess he can help in some way.
I can certainly comment, although I did raise my hand to ask a question, but I'll answer Taya's question first. So we've thought about some things, some criteria that we might suggest in terms of the service quality. We're mindful of the platforms that we're reliant on in providing the community capabilities. So, for example, the EUMETSAT's part of the European Weather Cloud gives a 99.5% uptime. We cannot obviously exceed that. So, I mean, if even a bit of that platform went down, such as the networking or the load balancing, our service would stop working. So we have to be mindful of that. We also need to do some. Now that we are having a system that works, we can start to test and better understand the costs of making it more redundant, more failure resistant, and so on and so forth. So we can start to do the sensitivity tests in what does 99.9% cost us compared with 99.5, and so on. I don't have all the answers for you today, but we're certainly engaged with Willie and the RODEO team to help quantify the costs associated with these questions. Does that begin to answer your question, Taya?
Can I just make a comment?
Sure.
Yeah, maybe you could also use some knowledge from the open data providers that what kind of demand we might be looking at, and maybe to have some sort of table that that in case and you show that there is these restrictions for the requests and so on, so you can sort of squeeze the demand, but maybe something like a table or some kind of estimations what kind of usage we would be looking at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also a good point. I remember actually we were in your home building up in Helsinki. We were comparing the statistics of Denmark, Norway, Finland for the open data consumption that you already have, and trying to make some estimates based on some averaging based on GDP, proportional representation, blah blah blah. I think we can begin to provide some of those estimates, and we can. That is on our work plan to do so. So I happen to be looking at Mikko to stick it on our list. So if I may ask my questions now. So this is a question to you, Willie. The timescales for making agreeing amongst ourselves about the different service levels for the potentially for different components. I may have missed it, but what timescale do we need to provide that input to the European Union, and what more can we do to help precipitate that decision?
In terms of the European Union, that's an easy one. When we start providing the data, then we need to be publishing the expected performance statistics of the APIs. In terms of our timescales, and I mean, Clement can jump in here if he wants. We've got a target to make a proposal by this autumn in terms of things like API operational costs, post RODEO, and other aspects of the RODEO project. So I would say, as an initial timescale, we need to be trying to at least make an initial stab at it by this autumn, I would say.
Yeah, just to add, I would agree with Willie. I think, I mean, next year we will need to actually make decisions about the post-rodeo management of things that will be developed within rodeo, including the maintenance of APIs and this kind of things, and this will require some cost estimates. So this is why we have been kind of promising to our members that by the end of this year we will, or by the autumn this year, we will at least have rough estimates about the costs related to that.
Okay, so then I understand that you will work on the cost of the different options and present that to the committees and eventually to the assembly together with the other parts of the budget for post-rodeo operations.
I'll say yes. I'm not sure who's going to. I'll say yes to that. That is certainly our intention. It may not be a finalist, but I think it can at least be a first stab at it. Roar.
Charlie.
Just to reinforce the point that Jeremy's made, thank you, Roar, is, you know, in the conversations with the European Union, there's no way that it can exceed the best availability of the hosting system, clearly. So the conversation can't go towards or beyond the availability of the European weather cloud. It's just, unless there's a different hosting option. I know that's obvious, but some people have unrealistic ideas of just how expensive the last 0.001% of 99.99% actually is. That's the expensive bit.
Absolutely. And it's also a point here, I think, that it's a difference between saying 99.5% and at the same time guaranteeing response in an hour, because if you guarantee response in an hour, you need to have people on site ready to do something immediately, even though you can allow yourself a bit of downtime.
Yeah, I before you go, I saw Rup had his hand up. I even worry when I hear 9 on the end of 90. So 99%. If you've got a piece of data that's need to be made available every day, that doesn't give you a lot of scope for days where you can not miss. You know, that is actually quite a high level of service you're committing to on that. So yeah, we need to. I agree. We can't be better than the systems we're being hosted on, and we need to be very careful when we start talking about any kinds of figures.
Absolutely, Rope.
Thank you. I just wanted to note on this discussion, without going any numbers, that these availability figures, for example, are not necessarily bound to availability of single platform, because the services need to be made redundant anyway, and that will help in practical availability. Now, obviously, that has a cost in design and development, but it is still most probably much lower cost than having 24/7 operations for the whole value chain. So that needs to be taken into account in the design and discussion.
Yeah, that's correct. Charlie.
I'm sure this is obvious. Thank you, Roy. I'm sure this is obvious in Willie's statement, but there's a difference between the availability of the platform, the catalog, and the cataloging services as distinct from the endpoint availabilities. Of course, the endpoint availabilities will ultimately be the responsibility of the Met services, and they might run at much lower services. So it's just, you confuse me a little bit, Willie. There's a difference between, I think what you're talking about here is the availability of the service, specifically the catalog service and access to the endpoints, as distinct from, and all the brokering services, as distinct from the availability of the endpoints, because at the end of the day, the endpoints are federated, and therefore, to some extent, the metadata should describe that those endpoints will be available to the extent that the individual Met services are prepared to make them available. So you might have two different levels of service if that makes sense. One associated with the endpoints and one associated with the federated platform.
That's why I did mention separately the gateway and also the API. Although when I talk about APIs, I'm probably talking about API endpoints. In terms of the regulation is only mentioning the API endpoints, and that might be down to the individual members to state that this is the level of service that their API endpoint and published can provide. But of course, the gateway cannot be worse than the best of the API endpoint services. Well, I mean, it can be, but you would have to change the endpoint. So there's no point an endpoint saying we'll be 99.8% if the gateway is going to be at 99.5%. So yeah, no, I mean, I'm clear in my head and in the slides that there is a difference. Maybe I've not encapsulated it as I've been speaking, Charlie. I can't believe I would confuse you on something technical.
Okay, Mikko.
Yeah, I have one comment or observation. When we are considering the service level that we would want from this system, it's often easy to think this as an open data service or HVD service for the general public, but this is also, to my understanding, planned to be replacing some of the data exchange that we already do between the members, whether it's a bilateral arrangement or through GTS, especially ISO part. So what is the service level that we ourselves need when we exchange, for example, observation data? That has to be considered also when we determine the service level that we want from this system.
Yeah, that is correct. You want to comment on that, Willie? Or
I agree. I mean, that's why I mentioned. I mean, the gateway, for example, we expect will have higher levels of service because if we are exchanging data for data assimilation, for critical, more time critical services, then yes, that is going to have to be very resilient and have a high level of service. So yes, but within the project itself, in terms of looking at HVD or the infrastructure for HVD, the reason we're picking on that and differentiating is because that's what the project is about. If we start getting involved in lots of different levels of services, we need to be careful of scope creep. So really, that's why I'm kind of concentrating on answering the exam question for the EU, but we recognise all these different variables that we need to take into account as we're building the gateway, if that makes sense.
Tarja.
Yes, maybe a comment to Willie that we have discussed internally with Timo, who is actual project manager, about these cross-cutting issues relating to operational cost estimates that we didn't have actual tasks for them, but I think we'll have to maybe make a workshop or somehow tackle these questions for Clemen for the autumn. So we have noticed that there is some task which were not maybe in the original planning so clearly identified, but which are sort of cross-cutting of different work packages.
Yes, that is correct. I mean, there are, as I say regularly, there are lots of things that have been coming out of the woodwork as we progress with the project, and actually it's not a surprise because, you know, a 6.2 million euro project is going to be very complex. And also, we've discussed this, as you know, and one of your colleagues, Anu, will be running with this quality of service. So my kind of not really my job is done, but my detailed involvement in the quality of service won't be as high as it was, because I know who's got some experience in this area will be taking that aspect forward. So yeah.
Thanks. I have a question as well, Willie. So
I think I can allow that, Roar.
we will be giving some feedback to the EU on the quality of service at some point. But my experience is that over time we get to know the new systems better, and they get to be more and more stable. Is it possible for us to give them a bit lower expectations in the beginning and then raise it as we get this experience and the system stabilize?
Yeah, I mean, all the regulation says is you have to publish your, level of performance. Now, if they're not happy, they could probably come and ask questions. But I don't see these things as being something you do as we implement and then we leave it alone. These are systems we're putting in, as you said. We'll get to know them better. We've already had conversations about how they might evolve in the future. So that is a perfectly reasonable suggestion.
Thanks. Other comments at this point? Doesn't seem to be the case, but I think you, Willie, and the team has got some input to take into consideration as you proceed on this and develop the scenarios that we will discuss in the HumanNet bodies later this year.
We do indeed. Okay, so if that's the questions, Ro, I mean, thank you very much, everybody, for the input. That was what I was hoping. I was hoping to hear other people's voices more than my own. I'll move on to APIs now, but in
I think you muted yourself, Willie.
Yeah, I don't know how I did that because it wasn't intentional, I can assure you. In my agenda, it says that Jeremy is going to start off with saying something to about APIs. So I'm not actually sure what, and I'm not actually sure if Jeremy knows. So we'll give him an opportunity to say something. And if he doesn't want to say anything, I'll continue.
I think that I've said enough about APIs and the need for them to be consistent. So on the basis of the fact that our time is precious and we only get it once, let's move straight to you, Willie.
Very good answer, Jeremy. I've never known you to miss an opportunity to say something, I have to say, but yeah. Okay. APIs, what's the section going to cover? It's going to cover, it's really sort of communication and advice that we'll be providing from the project on APIs, or API endpoints, I think is the proper language I should use. Now, we did a survey on for DPAC last year, and there's about 6 members that stated quite clearly they will be developing their own APIs. And also there are a lot more, I think there's about 16, not everybody responded, that said that they were relying on whatever RODEO was developing. And a few that said, well, we've already got some, but as you're developing more modern APIs, we're interested in yours. So there's going to be different advice we'll need to be giving to different members.
Oh, you're muted again.
I unmuted myself because I realized what's happening is if I hit the space bar and the cursor is in the wrong place, it seems to mute me. But I spotted it the second time. So for APIs being developed by members, I mean, it is recommended that members develop standard EDR APIs, which are the APIs for data delivery. However, as was pointed out by the ESO team, the specifications are actually quite open. So, for example, you could develop an API that meets your own national requirements, but it might not be enough to meet the kind of international data sharing requirements that we have. So, what we're going to be doing in the next month or so is we in the project will actually provide guidance, because the important aspect here is going to be in what the output from your API endpoint looks like and the formats. So what we'll be doing in the project is providing guidance. So I'm running the engagement, but I'll be talking with the ESO team. I've already had conversations with Vega about that, and we will be putting together some information, and we'll be having conversations with those 6 members that are developing their own APIs, and also any more. So that is that aspect. Right, I haven't muted myself and the slides have moved forward, so that's a good sign. So options and advice for those relying on RODEO. I mean, what I'm going to do is take you through work package by work package. I mean, there's only 4, so it's not going to be a long time. So work package 3 is ESO. So that, for those of you that are relatively new and weren't around for the beginnings of the ESO business case, which was before RODEO, this is how we're going to be providing the observations data, the real-time observations data for the HVD regulation. And there are 2 ways of doing this. It's going to be on the European Weather Cloud. So the ESO setup is going to be on there. So members can just send their data into the ESO setup, and it will be made available, and therefore you're compliant. The other option, if there are members, and I know there are some members that need to have something separate, it will be possible to mimic the ESO setup that's on the European Weather Cloud in an NMHS, and we'll be providing some guidance on what members need to do and what resources they would need for that. So that is ESO. Work package 4, which is weather warnings, that's actually simple and straightforward. I hesitate to use words like simple and straightforward, because you usually discover it wrong. But we already have the Meteor Alarm website. Warnings are already going to Geosphere Austria to be put on the website. The API will be available on that website, and members will be users will be able to download the warnings from that site. I saw a hand flick up there, Roar. I don't know if I need to stop and answer the question.
Yeah, it's Charlie. I guess it's good to stop and take the question now. So please, Charlie.
Yeah, sorry, Willie, a couple of questions actually. The main one, I suppose, is you talked about other NMSs hosting, potentially hosting endpoints ultimately. What about other people hosting endpoints? So I'm really getting towards this 5 nines thing again. And, you know, there are means through which the Met Office certainly do that with people like Microsoft and AWS and so on. So is that in some way, and apologies if I should know this, but in the future, sometime down the future, if we did need to provide a very resilient, very high performance endpoint, would that be possible, do you think? Or do you think that it would be a self-hosted by members thing for our ways?
My understanding, I mean, somebody like Jeremy can answer this better than me. My understanding is that if a member chooses to use Microsoft Azure or AWS to make their data available rather than do it themselves, that's entirely possible. And my understanding, but I could be wrong, is that then they would effectively be using the API endpoint that's provided by AWS or Azure.
Yeah. Okay.
So we wouldn't need to do anything.
That's helpful. And just whilst I've got the floor, In the kind of cost machinations, I think it's going to be important that we include some carbon costs as well. I would advise that anyway. So alongside the material costs and estimates that you might be presenting to the European Commission, I'd be presenting carbon costs as well, because if they don't ask for it now, they will do at some point in the future.
Okay, we won't be presenting any cost to the EU. There's none at all. There's no reason for us to present any costs, as far as I'm aware. But I will take your point on the carbon cost thing. Okay, I saw Jeremy's hand flick up there.
Yes, just on those carbon costs, we've all got to report them now with the I forget which scope of emissions reporting we've got to do, but that would be useful to cover. Just on that comment that you made about delegating responsibility for delivering services onto somebody else's platform, as the data publisher, you are accountable for making sure you deliver to the service level agreement that you've committed to. So what you need to do is select a platform provider that offers sufficient quality of service to meet your needs. So I'm stating the obvious anyway, but you can't just select Jeff down the road to deliver your data. You have to do the various due diligence for that, and indeed some of that's to do with the due diligence about how they manage carbon and green energy and so on and so forth. So I've said enough. Thank you, Willie.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. Right. Did I miss her? Yeah. So in terms of climate data, and the thing about these is, I mean, the different work packages are talking to each other. So ESO are talking to FEMD, and ESO are talking to the climate data, and also the people that are working on the APIs in ESO are going to be working on the radar data APIs as well. So the whole project is talking to each other, as you would expect. So in terms of the climate data, that work package has already been talking to the project partners about what the requirements would have to be. And also, I believe that at the heads of climate meeting later on this year, those details are going to be passed on by the climate programme to the other EU-based members and climate, so that they have an understanding of what they need to do to be able to be compatible with what the climate programme is developing on the climate data wrapper. On the radar data, the Opera composite is planned to be on the European Weather Cloud. We will be going through the committee, just because that's a convenient point to talk to members, to see whether they'd be happy for us to use some of their EWC allocation. So the starting point is, can we use some of the members' EWC allocation? If not, then we go back to ECMWF, UMETSAT, and have the conversation of how we manage it. The other thing that is actually we're going to have to discuss with members is how they want to provide their own national radar composites and single site data. Because once the setup is there on the European Weather Cloud, we could provide the single site data, which Opera will have anyway, to make sure that members are compliant on that. And we also could provide members national radar composites, make them available as well. That would be for individual members, and we'll be conducting a survey later on, asking members about this. So it's really just to warn you about that these are things that we need to solve within that work package. So we'll be coming and asking the question. And we've touched on the post-rodeo funding, and that's just a reminder that that's something that we still need to deal with, and we'll be looking to do a proposal in the autumn, as I said. So this is just a diagram we've been showing various bodies and groupings that we're meeting with. This is just an initial timeline for when APIs are going to be released for testing. So we've got the ESO API in the spring. In September, the climate API wrapper should be ready, and in December the warnings archive and real-time API should be ready. And then when we go into 2025, we'll have the different aspects of the radar API, the composite and the volume will be developed in early 2025, the first half. Partners will be publishing their climate APIs by the middle of 2025, and then we will end up with the radar volume archive being ready at that point, and then the machine learning data sets that are being developed by ECNWF will be available towards the end, and that will be the end of the project at that point. So that's initial time. This timetable may change as we are working away, developing, finding things, but I'm also responsible for working with the project partners who are part of the testing plan. So that is everything that I had to say. Obviously, I'm happy to answer any more questions people have got on the APIs, and while people are around and we're doing the wrap up, then again, just get a feel for if people are happy, people want more information, then please put your A, B's and C's in the box. And also, I'll go back to that one. Anybody's got any questions, please come to me. And there will be information on the RODEO project as well as we move forward. But please, any questions at all, come to me, and if I can't answer them, I will find somebody in the project that can. So that is it from me, Roar. And happy to answer any more questions.
Thanks, Willie. Yeah, we open up for questions on the APIs as well, obviously. And you may again put some A's, B's, or C's into the chat. So a question really to all of you. I mean, Willie now presented a timeline for the APIs, the different APIs. But how do you see the process towards operationalization of the whole all parts of this project? When should it be available for all of us to use? What's do you have some step towards that you can tell us? What do you say about that, Jane?
So in terms of FEMD, we've got some minimum viable products for much of it. Development portal is pretty much nearly there. We've called it prototype because it's not totally there. So in terms of channeling APIs through, that timescale, I'd say, depends on the other work packages. So the slide further up that Willie showed on when things are going to be published. So that's our timeline for that. In terms of the Data Explorer, it's early days. So we're currently in the stage where we're getting the quotes. And in fact, next week, we're going to start focusing on defining that phase of the program. So what tasks and outcomes and deliverables and the timescale of that. So we'll have a much better idea of that in the next probably like 3 or 4 weeks.
Good. When do you think it would be useful to provide more information to the members on the timeline and the